Okay.
So hello everybody, welcome to the guest talks of Language Assessment Literacy EVO 2022. Today we are very happy because we are hosting Hossein Farhady, and he's going to be talking to us about a multidimensional framework for EFL Teachers Law. And we're very happy. My co-moderator Anna and Ece, and our audience, all of them are here. Before we start, Ece is going to introduce our speaker to you. Ece, over to you.
Thanks, Aslı. Actually, that honor belongs to Anna. First, I'd like to have a few words about what is happening right now in the course. On the Canvas platform this week, we are working on assessment design and task evaluation. And this week is the week where our participants create their assessment evaluation tasks, upload it on the platform, and receive participants' feedback. This is where we are. We don't think that we are not reading your evaluations. We are, but we first want to see how you give feedback to each other. It's because the interaction among you is really incredible to see, and we are here all to learn from each other. So keep up with the good work. Anna, over to you.
Yes, okay, that's just part of my duties, because Ashley and Ece probably know you much better than I do. But for our audience, it is an honor for us to have Hossein Farhady with us. He received his MA in teaching English as a second language and PhD in applied linguistics from UCLA. He's a professor of applied linguistics at the ELT department at Yeditepe University in Istanbul, Turkey. He has taught courses on language testing, research methods, and TSP at the MA and PhD levels in Iran, Canada, Armenia, and the USA. He has directed MA programs in teaching English as a foreign language, 2 nationwide research projects on EFL and English for academic purposes, test development, test validation projects in Iran and the US. He retired in 2006, moved to the US, and worked as a senior scholar and project manager for testing organizations in the USA. He worked as the associate dean of the Department of English Programs at the American University of Armenia. His major area of interest is research on various aspects of language testing and assessment, and therefore his contribution here is most valuable and essential to us.
Okay, thank you so very much. Thank you for that nice introduction. It shows that probably the way you said it, it's a long time. US, Canada, other places, Armenia, Iran, and Turkey. Thank you so very much. I hope we will have a fruitful discussion and presentation. I would like to thank organizers, Aslı and Ece, and to giving me this opportunity to share with you my latest research on LAL, LAC, and others. So I would start with what I would like to achieve. Usually my objectives are a bit ambitious, but I'll try to manage. Number one, I would like to talk about the significance of LAC. I have watched Dina and Eileen, their presentations. Dina on LAL did a great job, gave you a very good review of what is going on in the field. And mine probably is Dina plus, a bit more. And so we will talk about the significance of LAC. Then my focus will be on definition of the construct of LAC. What is it that we are talking about? Oops, I think one definition is extra here. Huh? Oh, let me just fix it here for you guys. Okay. So the idea is for me to try to give you some information about the complexity of LAL. Usually we look at it in a very simplistic way. It is more complex than we can imagine. And then I will end the presentation by giving you some suggestions on research. Okay. Now, first, I would like you guys to think of an eagle's eye rather than the bird's eye. Bird's eye looks at specifics, but eagle's eye looks at from the top and sees everything in order. Look at the cycle of instruction. What happens when we start teaching? Well, as teachers, we teach, very simple. And we expect someone will hopefully learn. We're not sure, but when we teach, we expect that our learners learn. To claim for learning, we need evidence. When I said my students learned, then you may ask, what is your evidence? Evidence comes from some sort of testing, whatever you want to call it. You want to call it test, you want to call it quiz, you want to call it midterm, final, conversation in class, discussion in class, question and answering, any kind of information collecting device we need to collect in order to show evidence that learning happened. Based on test results, though, we make a decision on the learner. This is a very important part of our job. As teachers, we make decisions on the lives of our learners, and sometimes these decisions may have very significant consequences on the lives of our students. And this is very simple. Teach, someone learns, provide evidence, give a test, and make a decision. You pass, you fail. But it is more than that. And I would like you to see the big picture. Now, in this big picture, what you have a teacher. And the end result of teaching is decision making. We need to make a decision. You see, the connection is very straightforward. Teacher eventually makes a decision. But in this between, okay, we go through many ups and downs, many obstacles, and we want to see how they influence our business. And so many people don't pay attention to. Now, if you look at this slide, the slide has two colors. The upper color, I call it the bright side of our profession, because everybody knows it. There is a teacher, there is teaching, there is learning, there is evidence. Evidence comes from the test, and we make a decision. Sometimes we make a decision right here. But in this between, there are so many factors influencing our teaching, our learning, and our obtaining evidence. Now, the very first one is theoretical challenges. I'm sure even within you guys are so young, within your short experience of teaching and studying, either BA, MA, PhD, and your experience, you have witnessed many theoretical changes, if you remember. Of course you do. Grammar translation, audiolingual, direct method, cognitive method, functional method, communicative method, etc., all changing. And these changes are rooted in certain theoretical and philosophical principles. Now, theoretical changes, what happens? They change your teaching. You remember repeat after me days. And the theory changed, teaching changed. When teaching changes, the meaning of learning changes. You remember all, of course, in so many areas, it is still common. Memorize, take notes in class from lectures, memorize, and give it back to the teacher in the final or midterm. Okay? Evidence. How do we get evidence? Again, theories change from translation tests to multiple choice tests to these days of task-based tests, functional tests, etc. So they go along with the theory. Then we have psychometric changes. You guys are all aware that psychometric and the area of psychometrics is one of the fundamental areas in testing. Now, depending on what theory you follow, when theory here changes, psychometrics changes too. Once upon a time, we had multiple choice tests. Of course, we still do. It means that we are way back, okay, behind. Then with the changes, the concept of reliability changed, the concept of validity changed, the concept of standardization changed, and also learning, evaluating learning changed, because learning is not memorization anymore, for example. Okay, right now we talk about learning as a dynamic sort of process. So your tests should change, and also your test changed. Then the third one, which is not very much appreciated in our field, is idiometric changes. Idiometric refers to what we do with the tests in the educational context. For example, once upon a time, in our education, one test, still do, would determine your life. Entrance examination. Passed, happy. Failed, I don't know what would happen to you. And imagine if with 1 point or 2 points, you were the last person who failed. You are just 1 point above that person, 2 points above that person, and you pass. And I want someone to tell me the difference between the last person who passes and the first person who fails. There is no test to determine it, but we have to make a decision. So in idiometric, meaning of teaching changes. Teaching was lecturing. Now it is not lecturing. Learning was memorizing and storing the knowledge. Now learning is a dynamic process, cooperative learning. Evidence changed. We don't depend only on one test score. Now we are in the process of continuous assessment. All these changes happen chronologically. At the same time, they coexist. For example, still we have multiple choice tests. Still we have midterm final systems, and all universities are focusing on final. You know, final should have 60%, 70%, and I don't know why. In this context, contextual challenges we have to pay attention. When you are teaching in Greece, it is quite different from teaching in Istanbul, teaching in Washington, teaching in London. Different contexts dictate different types of teaching, testing, and learning. So context changes teaching. For example, if you do not have the facilities, in many schools we don't, of audio, visual sort of equipment, you're not going to be able to run an interactive online system. That is the restriction of the context. Learning also changes. or is influenced by context, and evidence changes. Now, one thing I would like you to pay attention to the context. For example, if you are in, I am giving you in Turkey, if you are in Turkey, you spend, or families I have heard spend more time on preparing the students for the tests of entrance examination more than they study for learning. Their objective is, no matter what, to boost up the score, whether you know or you don't. This is not the case right now in the modern education, no matter it is common in many, many areas. Then this poor teacher, considering all these, okay, gets into test to this learning area. This is the student. Here, you have all kinds of learner variables: motivation, attitude, parts of intelligence, self-efficacy, any variable that influences individual's performance, we need to pay attention to. And then the major issue, pandemic, okay? It influences everything. It forced us from face-to-face classes to online classes without much of preparation. We didn't even know how to use a platform. Of course, I'm talking about general, okay? And then all these changes go back here, influences teacher, changes teacher, that changes teaching, learning, evidence, test, and sometimes some people make a decision from the test directly to decision, which is not very appreciated, because all these factors should be taken into consideration. Now you see how big your picture is, how big and how extensive the concept of teaching and learning is. It's not just you teach and learn and test. There are so many factors to be considered. Now, within this framework, I would like to see, no matter what method we are using, no matter what strategies, materials, technology we employ, and no matter where we are, when we teach, who we teach, we need to ask a very important question. Did our students learn? And this is only teacher's job. I don't think anyone from outside, I don't want to downgrade tests like TOEFL, IELTS, Pearson, etc. They're fine. But the last person who would decide on students' learning is the teacher. Now, if the answer is yes, the next important question is, how do we know they learn? To answer this question, we need to have language assessment knowledge. This is the point of inception for the need for assessment knowledge, because we are accountable. In fact, in language education old days, language was defined as set of structures. Teacher's role was transfer the knowledge of the structures. Learning was storing and memorizing the knowledge, and testing was measuring the learner's stored knowledge. So teachers needed to know the principles of testing in this framework. This is the framework. If teaching is the teaching of structures, if learning is a storing, then teachers should know the principles of testing within this framework. And that is what we have been exercising for the last 50, 60 years. Now, I don't want to get into personal and social lives of teachers. We all know teachers are always underpaid. Teachers are always working 24/7. We are different from employers. When they shut down, go home, everything is done. But when we go home, it starts. Okay? So I don't want to get into that because I know all of us have suffered a lot from social and personal problems in the societies. It is not Turkey, it is not Europe, everywhere. No matter what, we need to be accountable for our students. We need to be accountable for our students' learning. We also need to demonstrate that our students learned. Now, to fulfill the first need, to be accountable, we need to be good teachers. I'm sure all of you are good teachers. And to fulfill the second need, which is to demonstrate, teachers should be good assessors. Good teachers and good assessors. In many, many cases, we have good teachers, all right, but not good assessors. And the question is, how much teachers need to know to be a good assessor? Initial movements. Well, when interest appeared in the field for LAC, or language assessment knowledge, many people started, but we did not have a clear idea about it. What was it? What is it that students and teachers should know in order to be assessment literate? So we followed the classical framework offered by National Council of Measurement and Education, and it is everywhere. They tried to define it, and they gave something like this: the ability to design, develop, and critically evaluate tests and other assessment procedures, as well as the ability to monitor, evaluate, grade, score assessment on the basis of theoretical knowledge. Okay, now, this is 30 years ago. And assessment instruments attempted to measure these elements, the ones that were approved. But what happened when we developed tests of LAL and LAC on these issues? The results were disappointing. Almost all teacher educators reported dissatisfaction with the assessment knowledge of teachers. There is no single evidence, okay, unanimously, and even they went further and said, teachers universally suffer from poor LAL. I mean, it is not, I have a data sort of papers, articles on reporting that teachers do not have enough assessment knowledge. And more importantly, since the tests were not designed well, teachers got the feeling, perceived themselves as unqualified for assessment, without paying attention that we were not assessing the right thing. So reasons, number one, our training of the teachers was inadequate. We did not, in many education departments, in many teaching departments, especially in ELT, even they did not have testing course. And so many people coming to our MA program, they claim that they did not have an assessment course, but they are teachers. Number two, most of the tests developed followed assessment standards of early 90s. So whatever the definition was 30 years ago, all tests were based on those definitions. And also teachers, another reason was that teachers were aligning their assessment with the final examinations of the country. If the final examination is in multiple choice discrete point, they would teach discrete point. And the question is, maybe we are not attempting the right construct of LAC. Maybe LAC is something else, or has changed. Maybe the framework in 1990s does not really apply now. These guys examined 36 LAL measures, and collectively they came up with that LAL tests had very weak psychometric characteristics, and the content was not representative and relevant to the content of what we are doing right now. And this was a big and major change. And that is why some scholars supported a change in the definition of LAL. Now, what happened and why this happened is that in education, there was a reform. They said language is not a set of structures. Language is a dynamic system for communication. You see the difference in the definition. They said learning is not memorizing or storing. Oh, this is some 100 years ago, that learning involves cognitive, metacognitive strategies, activities. Learning should give you a sense of achievement, create self-regulation and autonomy. These are the principles of new learning definition. And teaching aims at enabling learners to transform information, to solve problems. Just last week, the United Nations reported a new definition for learning, said learning or knowledge is something you have that should make a change in your life. It is beyond just learning and accommodating and or storing knowledge. The knowledge should help you change your life. And testing focuses on assessing the process of language as an enhancement. When these change, then assessment should change. The pleasant consequence of all these changes in 3 areas was to move from teaching, learning, testing. I showed it to you at the beginning. There is a linear relationship between them. You teach, then someone learns, and then testing. It changed into teaching, learning, assessment within the curriculum. So they are all integrated. Part of teaching is assessment. Part of assessment should be learning. Part of learning should be assessment. So they are so interwoven that separating them is not recommended anymore. And this is within the framework of recently what people call learning-oriented assessment. Learning-oriented assessment, or some people call it assessment-oriented learning. It means that assessment, learning, and teaching are integrated, and they developed good tasks for learning-oriented assessment. For example, some of the tasks are individual, and probably Asli and Ece have experienced some of these works. Individual, like student reflections. Extremely important. If you make a channel of communication individually between you and your students and give them instructions what to write on reflections. Portfolio is very popular, but practically difficult to run. Though in many cases they use portfolio, but with the wrong process. Pair and group projects, very helpful. The more you push students towards collaboration and cooperation, the better learning is going to happen. Remember, the hidden agenda is learning. Information on rubrics. Share your rubrics, your instructions with your students as detailed as possible. The more students are aware of your criteria, of your sort of rubrics, the better they would learn towards those rubrics. Peer and self-assessment. Please do not underestimate your students. Your students, first of all, since they are one generation after you, they are smarter than you are, number one. Don't doubt it. Don't say students don't understand. Don't say students are kids, okay? No, they do understand everything, okay? When you give them the chance to peer assessment or self-assessment, they are very, very careful. Remember, the purpose is not really to assess them, but if you want to assess something, you have to know it. And the hidden agenda for peer and self-assessment is that first you need to know. In order to know, you need to learn and then use your knowledge to assess. And this is the heart of today's modern education, feedback loop. Feed forward and feedback. When you give feedback, this feedback should function as feed forward for the next assignment or for revision or for improving. And this feedback loop, you give feedback, functions as feed forward, then comes to you again you give feedback, feed forward, improvement, change. This is called feedback loop, which is very important. And of course, collaborative assessment. Ask your students to develop tests for you. Don't worry, you're not going to use their tests, that's fine. But for them, in order to write a test, they need to learn it first. And this is a kind of underlying motivation for them to learn. When they learn, that's all we need. That's all our hopes and dreams, okay? Without pressing, they would learn in order to participate in assessment. Now, with these changes, our teachers now need to have assessment knowledge of this framework. Old framework would not work. And our assessment, our teachers' knowledge, our LAL should focus on these principles rather than old principles. That is why we need ongoing teacher training, ongoing teacher preparation, teacher education to help them update themselves and face the challenges. Now, when these changes happened, then we would like to change our perception of LAL too. We should go along with them. And Booker says the old framework, the old principles do not work anymore. And we want to define, we want to see how we can make changes in our perception of LAC or language assessment knowledge. As long as we do not have a clear definition, we are not going to know what our teachers need. Remember, intuitive talk is very good. And we can talk very well with intuitions. But now we need evidence. This old frameworks, I think Dina presented many frameworks, starting from Schulman and coming up to Taylor and others, Linda. Of course, they're all good, but we are trying to improve them. Some of these models, this is Schulman's famous old model. They say, for a teacher, we need to have content knowledge. In our area, it is language proficiency. Pedagogical content knowledge means teaching, learning, anything related to teaching. And curricular knowledge, general educational programs, we need to know them. These three components are classic. And then, after Schulman, Grossman, Timmer, Tui, Nicholson, others, Kumar, Taylor, they all offered new and sort of more advanced and developed models. And when you examine all these models, there are three important points that all of them, almost all of them, identically share. One is content knowledge. Almost all models emphasize that teachers first should have knowledge of the subject matter they are teaching. And we don't have doubt about it. Ours is English, physics is physics, chemistry is chemistry, doesn't make much of a difference. Content knowledge, despite its importance, this requirement is often taken for granted. We assume that teachers, don't look at teachers in a particular area. As I said, look at the issue with the birds, with the eagle's eye. Look at the world, okay? And there are many, many reports that teachers in the world, they do not have enough language proficiency. My experience is that many EFL teachers, if we give them a test of proficiency, they would not meet IELTS 8 or IBT 105. They are much lower than that. This is one problem. The second component is pedagogical content knowledge, meaning what elements of pedagogy we need in order to teach this language. There are differences among scholars, but mostly they say refers to knowledge, skills, abilities that teachers need to accomplish their teaching mission. And it includes many, many things. We need to know what teaching methods are, learning is how it is defined, what is an appropriate assessment. We need to have information about all these. And in our area, in ELT context, I think we need to know linguistics, we need to know methodology, we need to know psychology of learning, technology, etc. And probably we can put all of them under the cover of applied linguistics, our knowledge of applied linguistics. So reconceptualizing what we have, one of the issues which is overlooked, I think, is that in almost all models, the models are one-dimensional. It means that add this knowledge, content knowledge, to pedagogical content knowledge, to experiential knowledge, then you have LAL, which is not the case. And it is assumed that it applies to all teachers indiscriminately, which is not correct either. The models do not seem to accommodate the diversity and importance of the context where the real teaching occurs. Now, since the existing models are unidimensional, they don't account for different groups of teachers. For example, LAL for university prep teachers should be different from teachers at the elementary school. LAL for teachers of ESP should be different from those of teaching at high school. Young learners, young learners probably do not need, teachers of young learners do not need to know complex formulas for reliability and validity. But they need to know how to communicate with kids and how to assess kids. Young and adult learners, high school versus university, test-oriented versus assessment-oriented contexts, monolingual, bilingual, or multilingual contexts. The existing models do not accommodate. They cover everything as the same. Now, this is the model which is very common. Teachers' professional knowledge includes content knowledge, pedagogical content knowledge, and the third one is kind of varying by scholars. Some people call it experiential knowledge, some people call it practical knowledge, but our assessment is part of pedagogical content knowledge. It means that methodology, linguistics, all knowledge, pieces of knowledge of applied linguistics in our field are necessary. And in our discussion, we are talking about LAC. So in language assessment knowledge, we have a LAL, which is very common and everybody talks about it. And to be honest, most of us don't know what it is. Okay, and this is the important point in our field, that when we talk about a concept, we need to have a clear operational definition of that concept. That is why if you examine tests, they're almost all the same. But to me, there is another area here, and I call it LAL plus for specific contexts. Okay, now I'm going to open up this for you and you see how it works. The multidimensional model, LAC is here, language assessment knowledge. We have LAL, what we call language assessment literacy, the minimum. When we say minimum, minimum is a subjective term. What is minimum? What is minimum for you may not be for me. What is minimum for a university teacher may not be minimum for a high school teacher or vice versa. That is where we need to work on. LAL plus then, which is beyond LAL, this is for all teachers. And we don't know what it is. Then adults, young learners, high school teachers. What is that? I can't see it from here. Let me see.
University.
What is it? Learn
University.
skills. Okay, skills. Like in order to be assessment literate on skills, you need special training. Assessing speaking is quite different from assessing reading. Then assessing ESP. None of these models accommodate or accommodates all these majors. Administration. All administrative people should understand the purpose of assessment and how to make that idiometric part, how to make decisions. Policymakers, they should understand what assessment is in order to put in their policies what and to what extent we need assessment knowledge. Skills, and I think this is technology, right? You know, these days, technology is sweeping everything. But then it is not sort of seen in the models. And still, it is not the end. 10 years ago, we did not have technology in our business. Now it is there. Who knows? Maybe 5 years from now, we will have another area that teachers desperately need in order to cope with the challenges. So this is what I call multidimensional model. And I'll explain in a second what we need to get there. Cautions. Now, extending this existing models does not solve any problem. It is just in words. It probably creates more questions than solving the questions and answering the questions. And when we attempt new questions, maybe old questions will be answered. The extension is meant, the purpose of this extension is meant to accommodate diversity of the contexts. And the new perspective I call cross-contextual or multidimensional assumes LAL as a general requirement for all teachers, no matter what the major is, no matter where you're teaching. And this is what all models acknowledge. And the new perspective further assumes that other constructs may accommodate emerging contexts. Advantages. It looks at LAL as a multidimensional construct, not one-dimensional construct. In our, I don't know, in our profession, in teaching business, there is no single dimension, any construct. They are all constructs are combinations or interactions of many, very, like when you're talking about teaching, teaching is not just one dimension. As a teacher, you need to know teaching methodology, you need to know psychology of learning, you need to know sociolinguistics, you need to know applied everything. It can accommodate lack in different contexts. For example, teachers teaching at prep school in universities may need a specific type of knowledge which is beyond LAL, and which is also different from that piece of knowledge in another context. And it will open, I'm sure, new research. Teachers will not be frustrated by being called assessment inefficient. I was really feeling frustrated. Reading report after report, teachers are not proficient, teachers are not literate, teachers don't know assessment, but we are teaching teachers how to assess. How come all the results show that they are inefficient? Maybe the problem is with us, not with them. It would encourage researchers to operationalize, to come up with concrete operational definitions of what they mean by assessment literacy. And also it will lead to developing unique assessment tests to accommodate their needs. I have just a new report that supports the validity of this. They are also claiming that one dimension or one element is not going to work. What I would like to suggest as research agenda for young scholars like you, number one, we need to collect data, evidence for all those components in the new model. Then investigate the LAL plus constructs, collect data on them. And actually, these guys did start something, and they came up with the same thing. Theoretical dimension, through factor analysis, they found theoretical dimension, test construction, and statistical knowledge. These are three majors. Theoretical dimension is pedagogical content knowledge, and test construction is the practical side. And only then we can understand or have some insight towards LAC and LAL. Important, integrating qualitative and quantitative sources. Most of the needs analysis instruments, most of LAC instruments have been based on participants' judgment, perception. And in many cases, unfortunately, young researchers assume that perception data is hard data. Perception data represents the reality, which is a false assumption. Research after research, we have found that what people say is not what people do. Okay? When you talk to people, they're talking about Vygotsky, they're talking about dynamic assessment, they're talking about interactive assessment, cooperative assessment, fantastic, okay? But then when you go to class, they are practicing what we did 70 years ago. This is what we need to do research on. And the last point that I would like to emphasize very much, which is ignored except for a few cases, that when we do research on teachers' LAL, let's say I am perfect in LAL. Just assume. What good does it do for me? How does it influence my students' learning? Now, this is an area of research that is quite untouched. The effect of assessment knowledge of the teachers on students' learning. If I don't know anything about assessment, and you know a lot about assessment, would it make any difference in our students' achievement? What we find out, not very much. Okay, because the reason is that teachers who are knowledgeable, they don't use the knowledge in class. They know what to do, but they don't do it. They know what they're doing is 50 years old, but since they are comfortable with that, okay, they resist changes. And I hope teachers participating in this event would have some sort of, I would say, acceptance for change. Okay, because if we don't change, we are not going to get the result of our efforts, no matter how hard we do everything for our students. We do everything to help our students learn. If it doesn't happen, whether I am knowledgeable in testing or not, then it is not good for anything. The same thing goes with methodology. If you know everything, you know, if I ask about methodology, they say, no, Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. Hey, come on, where is it in the classroom? When you go to class, there is no zone at all, let alone proximal development. They do understand, they have the knowledge, but they do not implement. And these areas would lead us for the next 10 years. Eventually, we're going to come up. Right now, I have a PhD student who is working on assessment knowledge of EAP and ESP teachers. And you cannot imagine how fascinating the findings are. They are quite different from general teachers. They need specific knowledge beyond general knowledge of testing in order to handle EAP, ESP classes. The same is going to happen if we compare kids versus adults, young learners versus adults, if we compare university versus high school versus elementary school. These definitions, these differences should be manifested in our model of LAL and train our teachers in the direction that would be most helpful for them. I think that's it. I'm just hoping for brighter days for all teachers. Since I'm always a teacher, I always hope for myself, brighter days for myself too, including you guys. Now I'm open to questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Farhady, for this enlightening talk. Now, you were always offering some changes. This time you're offering a totally new model in which we can work on assessment literacy. You prefer to call it assessment knowledge for teachers. But in the chat, I've seen a couple of questions. I can go and read them, or let's start with this. If anyone, you might have already typed in your question, but here is the opportunity. You can simply unmute your microphone and please ask your question to Professor.
Okay, now before going, I just saw one question from Mehmet Kazan. Says some institutes hire testers, assessors. What? Testers, assessors? I don't know. Some institutes do that, but their function is to develop tests. They don't probably communicate with teachers very much. This is a kind of secrecy. They are secret people there. Nobody can touch them. Okay, but they're not in the classroom. They don't understand the dynamic, or not understand. They don't pay attention to the dynamics of assessment in class. And I think all of us should value teachers, should put more responsibility on the shoulders of teachers. At the same time, take care of their life. Okay, in the most convenient way, so they have peace of mind to work. Yes, not other questions.
There was a comment from Tamari asking for other contexts. Actually, this is a question for all the participants, and we'd like to hear about your comments, of course. Separating the testing unit from the teaching unit, I can understand from the comments that in some contexts they are together, so the teachers are responsible for test preparation and administration, whereas in some other contexts they are totally separate, totally different. How do you evaluate this? So
I would like to refer you guys the answer to this one, if I can find, oh, this one right here. Okay. Those who are separating teaching, learning, and testing, okay, they live in the world of 1960s. The most modern 170s. Okay. Now this is, oh, oops, I'm sorry. This is the model right now. This is what the world is doing. This is how teacher education is advancing, saying that within a curriculum, learning, teaching, and assessment must be integrated. And I wish I had a chance to show you how this concept of integration of learning, assessment, and teaching, how it works fantastically well. And you don't really need anything called test, because it happens through the classroom instruction, assessment, teaching, learning, feedback, feed forward. And you know, the idea is that in this system of linear model, okay, when teacher teaches, doesn't feel the responsibility to check whether the students learn or not, because someone else is going to check it. Testing office will check it. Okay, so I think we should. I don't know in your context, but the places I have seen, except for a couple of advanced countries, all Middle East, all Southeast Asia, even China, Korea, they're all living in this area. So I think separating them is going to hurt learning. Okay, all assessment, all learning tasks, assignments should be both learning and assessment tasks. And I have an article published in, I don't remember the name of the journal because there are too many, but there I have shown how certain tasks could serve as learning and assessment tasks, and it is wonderful. Gives you some sort of freedom, so you put everything, and students work very hard. Okay, any other question?
Thanks, Professor Farhady. Another question I can see is from Alavat. Why do teachers reject change in assessment, although they have knowledge? Why do you think?
I think they don't reject changes in testing. They reject everything new. And that is not for teachers. That is for me, for even professors too. Because when I teach, for example, a textbook for a couple of years, I have my syllabuses, I have my PowerPoints, I have everything, okay? Then I'm not willing to go and read another book, another presentation. You know, people are just doing what they have been doing for the last 10, 15 years. If you don't believe me, make it a research method, research topic for yourself, and examine the syllabuses of the last 10 years of 10 professors or 10 teachers. You won't see much of change. That is because they don't want, they need to work harder. They need to get new information. They need to plan a new syllabus, and that is difficult, and they're not paid for it, very simply.
Flexibility and adaptability always is the
always, even from today to next day.
Yes.
And we have a question from Mustafa Srakaya, I guess.
Yes, thank you.
Hi.
First, thank you for your fruitful session, Professor Farhady, and I'd like to hear your opinions about the centralized exams. Can you hear me?
You were not supposed to ask difficult questions.
Okay, so let me specify it. For example,
No, that's fine. All central tests, okay? All central tests, no matter, start with IBT, TOEFL, IELTS, etc., entrance examination in Turkey or all universities,
yes.
all of them. The purpose they have is different from the purpose of educational tests. They are norm reference tests. They want to compare people. They want to, now the quality of those tests is not in question right now, okay? For example, IBT, IELTS, Pearson, they have fantastic quality. They are very good, but the purpose is different. Their purpose is not to help our students learn. Their purpose is to check. They are looking to measure the product of education in one session, okay? But our business in teaching, they are, well, if I want to classify the tests, one is normative, okay? Normative tests are good or bad. We need them because, like, when 1 million people are taking the test, you can't do much, okay? But then they should, one of the reasons that people rejected them was that they are not concerned with the curriculum. They do not show how much teachers work. Teachers work on something and they test something else. But their purpose is different. I would draw a line between normative tests and the rest of the tests. So normative tests are not within this framework. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay.
There are a couple of comments coming, suggestions coming from Anita. She's been.
Are you watching the time?
Yes, I think we will conclude in a few minutes. So let's take the last question. I think
I am okay. Just I was trying to schedule you guys. Yes.
Thank you. Sezgin, maybe this is the last question. Sezgin Doruk.
Thank you, Farhady Hocam. Thank you very much for this presentation. I want to ask you one question about this, let's say, assessment literacy. Where should we start changing this literacy, assessment literacy of the teachers? I mean, who should be the pioneers of these change progress? Because I know that there are some, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
I think there are some institutions for assessment, literacy, and a variety of assessment in different countries. Like, I think Australia has one institution for assessment and the diversity of assessment as well. Mm-hmm. And in Hong Kong, I think there is one as well. I mean, David Carlos is working on this feedback loop as well. What do you think? I mean, do you think we should have a top-down change or a bottom-up change? Who should be the first changers?
Yeah, I am always for bottom up. We should start with our students, then our teachers, then our community, then our nation, and then the government. Okay, education is not anything you can do by orders. Education is not anything you can issue. Okay, you guys should do this, you guys should do. Education is not the field of shoulds. Education is the field of is and are. Okay, so I think as they did, we should, in every country, we should do the same thing. Of course, in every country we have had some research. Like in Turkey, we have had a lot of research on assessment literacy of teachers, and if you go and read them, they're all complaining about students, about teachers' knowledge of assessment. Okay, and now why assessment is more important than others, probably because assessment is the bottleneck, and there you're going to make a decision. That is why it seems to be more important than others, but that's not the case. If you don't have good teaching method, if you don't have good learning process, then your assessment is not going to be good. They are all integrated. So I am, to answer your question, I am for bottom up, and we should start from bottom and go with needs analysis, then develop the tests, check the tests, and then put all these majors I told you, like high school, young learners, ESP, then through statistical analysis, you can find out commonality across all. And that would be the construct of LAL. Language assessment literacy for all, independent of where you're working. Then, if you are working in young learner context, your knowledge of assessment should be LAL plus what you need for kids. That I may not need it because I am teaching in prep school. And you will need a different type of ability or skill if you are teaching in prep school. So I think the ideal is to find that core. And this cannot be done but by research. If we identify the core is for everybody, then depending on your context, you're going to have core plus. And these pluses will be different from one another. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. Just, well, I wanted to mention whether we should start from, as you said, from bottom up, because maybe we can start this change, this kind of change from young learners, and then like the primary school, and then secondary school, and then the university. Because when you do this kind of different assessment literacy for students as well, I mean, students literacy assessment or assessment literacy, when we improve it, it won't go back. But when we improve first the primary school students assessment literacy, then it can go up.
That is,
so they will be already developed or employed these strategies, and they will expect their teachers to have different assessments.
Very well
strategies.
taken. Yeah, very well said. I have heard this sentence millions of times. Hocam, this is the first time I am facing this kind of education. I was used to listen and overnight memorize, and tomorrow, the next day, I would take the test and I would pass. And in my reflections, I receive statements like this. All my life, I have done this, but unfortunately, it didn't work for this course. I have to change my style of learning. Okay, so I think first of all, those who know, they should practice what they know, and they could be models for others. But in terms of research, we will start from the bottom.
Thank you. So alongside teachers, we need to take into consideration learners' assessment knowledge as well. Thanks for asking the question. We have another question in the chat from Zahra Bani Talebi. Can you see it, Hoja, or do you want me to read it out for you? So I think this question is related to the power of assessment literacy. Do you think assessment literacy can battle the effect of negative washback in coaching courses? Do you think we can have assessment literate IELTS instructors who can help with the washback effects?
I think this is something we are mixing two issues. Assessment as a professional assessor, like people in departments, people in IELTS, people in other professional organizations, that assessment is different from what I am talking about assessment. That assessment is not assessment. I wish I could have time to tell you guys that so many concepts that we're using are wrong. We do not have IELTS assessment. We do not have IBT assessment. If you look at the origin, they are called internet-based tests. They are tests, not assessment. Assessment is a new world. Assessment is a beautiful world at the service of learning. testing is not concerned with learning, but assessment, a major feature of assessment is feedback. Any test, whatever you want to call it, test, assessment, whatever, if there is no feedback, then it is not an assessment. Okay, so IELTS people, if they are assessment literate, they're going to prepare their students in a better way because they understand the dynamics of assessment. Other than that, okay, that is not assessment, it is a test. TOEFL is a test, Pearson is a test, university entrance examination is a test. If you give midterm or final, it is a test, it is not assessment, because you never give feedback on finals to your students. They take the final and gone. Okay, so there is a difference between this kind of testing and assessment. They are quite different. Assessment is loosely used these days. Everything is assessment, which is not. Assessment number, if you want to understand, if you want to know whether it is assessment or not, it is definitely with feedback. Even multiple choice, that's fine. If you give multiple choice tests to your quiz to your students, next week, bring it back, share it with your students, give feedback, and through this feedback, they're going to learn, not through memorization.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I see our audience nodding their heads. Everyone is nodding. That's
Yes,
great.
there is just no end to the things that we can learn from Professor Farhady. But
Thank you so very much.
Running out
Thanks
of time.
a lot for your talk, and thanks a lot to our participants for joining us today.
Thank you all. I hope it was useful, and it would, if I could make one epsilon of change in you guys' mentality towards assessment, I will be happy.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Professor Farhady.
Have a very good day. Bye-bye.
You too. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.